How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the SkillCapped 11.14 tier list update. We have lots to cover as Irelia and Lillia are seeing massive changes while Xin Zhao is finally receiving a nerf. To break it all down, we brought together our challenger players and have analyzed the most recent data so you guys can have the best read on the meta. But before we get into it, please be sure to check out SkillCapped if you really want to get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of this video or click the link in the description. Alright, let's get started. It's a very light patch in regards to item and rune changes, as Deadman's plate is the only item being adjusted. A very simple change, as the armor will be increased from 40 up to 45. The intent behind this buff is to give a little power back to the likes of Darius and Garen, as they've been hit pretty substantially by the Stride Breaker changes. Poppy is another top laner who will be liking this buff as well. Speaking of Darius, he'll be receiving a direct buff as his passive bonus AD will be increased from 20, scaling up to 205, up to 30, scaling to 230. E cooldown will be decreased, going from 26 scaling to 18 seconds, down to 24 scaling to 14 seconds. Although we wouldn't mind seeing Darius fall out of meta for a while, it's nice to see the Riot special of nerfing a champion and then nerfing their item may be coming to an end. Darius has lost quite a bit of power due to the dash removal from Stride, so Riot is reverting the direct nerfs they gave Darius a few patches back. All things considered, Darius will see a solid increase in strength for 11.14, so we'll be bumping him from B into A tier. Just like Darius, Garen will receive a boost this patch, with his Q movement speed being increased from 30 up to 35, scaling to 45%. Not as crazy as a buff compared to Darius, but we assume Riot went a little lighter because Garen has been performing better off stat-wise after the nerfs to Stride Breaker. Keep in mind, Garen doesn't max Q out until second, so this buff won't be super impactful till you reach the mid-game. Garen will become stronger in 11.14, but not enough to warrant a move up the tier list, as he'll join Darius in A tier. A pretty insane buff to Illaoi will be dropping this patch, as her base movement speed will be increased from 340 up to 350. 10 base move speed is actually huge, especially for a champion who's less mobile like Illaoi. Illaoi is quite underrated with Hullbreaker at the moment, so these two factors combined will force us to push Illaoi into S tier for 11.14. Lane Nocturne is being hit, as he's been an absolute monster due to the Stride Breaker changes. Passive will now be 50% effective on minions. This nerf is quite impactful, however, you have to keep in mind just how strong Nocturne really is. If Noc wasn't super broken, then a nerf like this would drop him down the tier list, but considering how far ahead he is of everyone else, we don't expect his relative power level to fall off. Noc will remain in our OP tier for 11.14. We've got a colossal amount of Irelia changes, as every single ability is seeing some sort of change. First, starting with base stats, her health is being lowered from 580 down to 520, while her health per level is going from 95 up to 110. This puts a dent in Irelia's early game strength, while it's a buff level 6 onwards. Magic resist will be lowered from 32 to 28, passive max stacks is being lowered from 5 down to 4, attack speed per stack will be adjusted from 8 scaling to 16% to 7.5 scaling to 20%. Damage is changed as well, going from 15 scaling to 66 plus 25% bonus AD to 10 scaling to 61 plus 30% bonus AD. So far, these changes are geared around reducing Irelia's potency in the early game while compensating her with more scaling. Q dash speed is being significantly reduced, while minion damage is changed from 55 scaling to 135 to 55 plus 12 per level. Moving on to W, it's receiving a massive buff. Damage reduction is changed from 50% physical to now 40 scaling to 80% physical, and 20 scaling to 40% magic. The max damage will be buffed, going from 20 scaling to 140 plus 100% AD to now 30 scaling to 290 plus 150% AD. W AP ratio is buffed as well, going from 80 up to 120%. Once again, another set of buffs to increase Irelia's scaling. E-missile travel time has been changed from based on distance to 0.25 seconds. E will no longer be castable while you're CC'd. And then lastly, the final change is to Irelia's ultimate. A new passive will be added to where Irelia's Q cooldown will be reduced by 0.5, scaling to 2.5 seconds. Overall, Riot's goal behind all these changes are to give Irelia more strength in lower brackets of play for solo queue. Reducing early game power and increasing scaling should lead to a better solo queue win rate throughout the majority of elos. All changes considered, we'll be bumping Irelia up one tier, going from B into A for 11.14. Alright, taking a look at our complete top lane tier list, we have Nocturne, Wukong, and Set as the 3 premier picks of the patch. Watch out for Illaoi, as the 10 move speed buff will be a lot more impactful than most people expect. Base stat changes always tend to be overlooked, but this one is no joke. We'll be covering the Akali Nerfs when looking at mid lane, however, top Akali will be affected as well and drops from B down to C tier. Our priority low elo picks for top lane are Wukong, Yorick, and Nasus, while the best bans include Set, Nocturne, and Wukong. Let's dive into the jungle now and have a look at the long-awaited Xin Zhao Nerf. If you are expecting something significant, then you'll be pretty underwhelmed, as Xin's W cooldown will be increased from 12 scaling to 6 seconds up to 12 scaling to 8 seconds. Don't get us wrong, 2 seconds off the spell you max first is a pretty decent nerf. However, considering how broken Xin has been over the past couple months, we anticipated a little more. We'll drop Xin from OP down to S, but by no means will he fall out of meta for 11.14. Another jungler we've had in the OP tier for a while now in Shaco is being hit with 2 nerfs. First one is to his base health, dropping from 587 down to 560. The second targets his base move speed, going from 350 down to 345. The nerfs will do a good job at bringing Shaco in line with other top tier junglers, but won't remove him from the meta. S tier is where Shaco lands for 11.14. It's looking like Graves will be back in a playable state this patch, as he'll receive another buff to his base AD. This time it's being increased from 66 to 68. Our analysts believe this buff is the last one needed to give Graves that push back up into a strong A tier position. Ivern is next up on the buff list, as his E shield will be increased from 80 scaling to 200 up to 80 scaling to 220. If the shield was buffed at the earlier ranks as well, we could see Ivern shifting back up into S tier. The buff isn't terrible by any means, as level 9 onwards you'll have a little more strength, but our analysts don't see it being a big enough buff to propel Ivern up the tier list. Ivern will continue to hold down an A tier slot for 11.14. Rek'Sai was hit a decent amount as a result of the Prowler's Claw nerfs, so Riot is giving her a buff to compensate. Unburrowed Q damage per hit is going from 20 scaling to 40 up to 21 scaling to 45. Burrowed Q damage will be increased from 60 scaling to 180 up to 60 scaling to 200. All in all, pretty negligible buffs for the most part. Sure, Rex scaling becomes a little better, but the early game is where she really shines. If Riot were to buff Q damage at rank 1, then we'd be talking, but these later rank buffs aren't as impactful. The Void Monster will continue to lock down a spot in our A tier. It's safe to say after the Mundo rework, he's had a very difficult time going where he pleases in the jungle. In order to shoot some life back into Mundo, Riot will be issuing a couple buffs. Level 1 attack speed goes from 0.67 up to 0.72. Passive health regen drops from 2% down to 1 scaling to 2%. Passive cooldown is increased from 45 scaling to 15 seconds up to 60 scaling to 15 seconds. Q monster cap is going from 300 scaling to 500 up to 350 scaling to 500. Q health cost refund on monsters will now be 100%. E bonus damage to monsters is being hiked up from 140 to 200%. And finally, E will now always punt small monsters immediately. Now, even though Riot stated they wanted to buff Mundo jungle with these changes, those passive nerfs are quite the hit. Top lane Mundo will actually become weaker for 11.14. The jungle buffs will definitely help shore up Mundo's weaker clear, making it much healthier and faster. At the very most, we can see Mundo jumping into a B tier position, but for now, he'll remain in C. Mundo was arguably one of the weakest junglers on 11.13, so even with decent buffs to his clear, we can't expect his relative power level shifting much. This patch is full of enormous changes, as Lillia is no exception. Health regen is going from 9 down to 7.5. Armor is increased from 20 to 22. Lillia passive will have a new effect to where over the duration she heals 18 scaling to 120 health against large monsters. The heal is 12 scaling to 189 against champions. Passive damage goes from 5% of max health to 6% plus 1.5% per 100 AP of max health. Q mana cost is going from 45 up to 65. Move speed max stacks drops from 5 down to 4. Move speed per stack is going from 7 scaling to 11 plus 1% per 100 AP to 3 scaling to 7% plus 3% per 100 AP. Q move speed duration will be increased from 5 to 5.5. Q stack fall off time is going from 1 to 1.5 seconds. Q cooldown will be increased from 4 at all ranks to 6 scaling to 4 seconds. And the base damage will be increased by 5 at all ranks. W change is way easier to digest, as the damage will be increased from 70 scaling to 130 plus 30% AP to 70 scaling to 150 plus 35% AP. E cooldown will see a big spike going from 12 to 18 seconds. The slow from E is being increased from 25 scaling to 45% up to 40% at all ranks. E damage will get a boost from 70 scaling to 150 up to 70 scaling to 170. The last ability being changed is Lillia's ultimate. Damage AP ratio will be increased from 30 to 40%. Sleep duration is going from 2 scaling to 3 seconds down to 1.5 scaling to 2.5 seconds. Initial drowsy slow drops from 25 down to 10%. The slow will no longer increase by 5% per 0.25 seconds. The biggest takeaway from these changes is the damage on all spells are up, while Lillia's overall utility is down. We see these changes shaping out similar to what we expect for Irelia, where for the majority of elos in solo queue, Lillia will become stronger. High elo and pro play may be a different story though, as losing utility from Q and ultimate will hit differently in more coordinated play. With so many changes, it's hard for us to accurately predict where Lillia will land on the tier list, but B is where our analysts see fit. Having a quick look at our jungle tier list, Nocturne will look down on everyone else as the king of the jungle in 11.14. The Nocturne Nerf only affects him in the solo lane, so he doesn't become any weaker as a jungler. Stride breaker changes from 11.13 have been extremely positive for Nocturne, which is why he's catapulted in strength. If you've been having success on Xin and Shaco in previous patches, there's no reason to drop them. Even though we've moved both champs out of OP and into S, it's more so because Nocturne is just on another level than Xin and Shaco being weaker. The best low elo picks for jungle are Warwick, Xin Zhao, and Fiddlesticks. Our analyst would recommend banning one of Nocturne, Xin Zhao, or Viego, as they're all played a ton and have immense carry power on the patch. Jungle was jam-packed with changes, so Riot's gone a lot lighter on mid lane. Akali is first up on the nerf list as her Q can no longer be cast during E. Our minimum damage is going down from 75 scaling to 215 to 60 scaling to 200. Our max damage is hit as well, going from 225 scaling to 645 down to 180 scaling to 600. Riot should just go ahead and rework Akali at this point because it seems no matter what they try and do, she always ends up problematic. Akali will be dropping down from A into B tier as a result of these nerfs. Malz has very quietly hung around as a solid mid laner for solo queue, but we didn't really see him as a candidate for nerfs. Nonetheless, Riot is nerfing Malz's base health, going from 537 down to 510, while his Q AP ratio drops from 0.65 down to 0.55. Even with these nerfs, Malzahar will continue to thrive as one of the more reliable low elo picks. In the higher elos where good players can abuse his weaker early game, it's a different picture, but since we put a heavier emphasis on champion strength in Diamond and below when making our tier list, Malz will keep his spot in S tier. So, other than Akali dropping down, there aren't really any crazy changes to the mid lane meta. Cat and Sylas will continue to dominate as long as they don't get nerfed. Kassadin is a really interesting pick right now as he's got a tank build going around of Frozen Heart into Riftmaker that gives him way more strength into AD compositions. Cass has always been known to struggle more against AD mids, but that's not really the case anymore, so don't sleep on him for 11.14. The top 3 low elo mids are Diana, Malz, and Annie, while we would recommend adding one of Katarina, Sylas, or Kassadin to your ban list. Ziggs has absolutely skyrocketed in power as a bot lane carry over the past patch, so Riot's looking to cool him off a bit. Base mana will be reduced from 480 down to 420. 60 mana is a pretty sizable nerf, but it's warranted with how strong the pick has become. When you consider most Ziggs players run Teleport and rush Lost Chapter, the mana nerf won't be the end of the world. Many Korean Ziggs have bypassed grabbing a tier and completely skip Archangels, so if it comes down to it, you should build tier again to help alleviate the mana nerf. Our analysts still see Ziggs as an OP bot lane pick, but if things shape out different throughout the patch, we'll update you in our mid-patch tier list. So without any major changes to ADC, expect the meta to stay pretty consistent. Kog and Ziggs will be our 2 OP picks for 11.14. Mages bot lane in general right now are really being slept on, so if your main goal is to climb, having at least one in your champion pool is a must. Aphelios is back in a playable state for the first time in Season 11, so if you've been wanting to pick him up, now is the time to do so. Veigar, MF, and Sivir are the highest value picks to climb low elo. Best ADCs to consider banning include Vayne, Ezreal, and Samira. To round everything out, let's run down the support role as we have 4 different champion changes. Karma is being hit with a nerf to her base AD, going from 54 down to 51. This nerf will slightly reduce Karma's bully power early on, and as a result, will be dropping her from S into A tier. Another enchanter in Seraphine is being targeted, but with a buff instead. Q damage will be increased from 55 scaling to 115 up to 60 scaling to 120. The AP ratio on Q will be increased as well, going from 40 scaling to 60% up to 45 scaling to 65%. A small buff overall that will give Seraphine a minor boost and solidify her as a strong A tier support. Feels like it's been an eternity since we saw Taric in meta, so he'll be buffed yet again. Q mana cost is lowered from 70 scaling to 90 down to 65 scaling to 85. E mana cost will drop from 60 to 40. Mana buffs are always nice for Taric, as he wants to spam his Q out as often as possible. If you're looking for an underrated support to pick up for 11.14, then Taric is a worthy option, as he'll be slotting into A tier. The final champion changes for 11.14 go the way of Tahm Kench. Passive damage will be adjusted, going from 2.5% max health to 12, scaling to 60 plus 2.5% bonus health. Q will now deal damage from Tahm passive. Q heal is changed from 6 scaling to 10% missing health to 15 scaling to 35 plus 4 scaling to 6% missing health. A bug fix will be issued to Tahm W so that the cooldown refund properly scales with ability haste. W cooldown and mana refund is increased from 30 to 40%. Ultimate shield gets a boost in power, going from 300 scaling to 600 up to 400 scaling to 600. Lastly, ultimate ally self slow is reduced from 40 scaling to 10% down to 30 scaling to 10%. Some pretty substantial buffs overall, but considering how weak Tahm has been in 11.13, his relative power level won't rise a ton. We'll be moving Tahm from D into C tier, but would still advise staying away if your main goal is to climb. So, another patch without any Lulu nerfs means she'll remain a must-pick or ban and stand alone in the OP tier. Two S tier champs we'd recommend abusing while everyone else sleeps on them are Maokai and Zyra, both very strong carry options who rely way less on their teams in order to make a great impact. The three best low elo picks are Brand, Leona, and Zyra. Send Leona, Thresh, or Lulu to the chopping block, as they'll all be extremely strong in the meta. Alright guys, so before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about SkillCapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we are able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent challenger players into Elo hell 629 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $4.99 a month if you're serious about improving. Thanks for watching.